Hi, Dr. D here. Welcome back and congratulations for taking the first step toward identifying and resolving your healthcare issues. Now, oftentimes I'm asked whether or not the matrix assessment profile identifies specific conditions or diagnoses disorders or diseases. And let me be very clear up front, it does not. This is not a test. This is an evaluation. And this evaluation is called the matrix assessment profile because we're assessing the human matrix, which is comprised of three basic components: the physical body, your biochemistry, and your psychological and emotional aspects. So in the reports that you're going to receive, you'll get a wide variety of information pertaining to specific things that you can do to contribute to your own well-being. You'll get specific recommendations created by me to tell you exactly what needs to happen in order for you to resolve the symptoms and the underlying condition that's causing those symptoms. And you're going to receive a wide variety of colored graphs, a bunch of numbers, colored bars, all with explanations that tell you exactly what they represent, exactly why they're happening, and exactly what you need to do to improve or resolve your healthcare situation. So with that being said, we want to move forward into talking about some of the specifics of the matrix assessment profile. How we arrive at that information, what we do with that information, and how that information translates into the condition you're experiencing, the condition that's causing the symptoms you're experiencing, and the solutions that are going to turn your symptoms into ultimate solutions specifically for you. Okay, let's talk a little more specifically about what is at the root cause of the symptoms that you may be experiencing associated with your overall health, your accelerated biological aging, and the conditions that you expressed concern about on your intake form. The underlying cause of all of your experiences can be summed up in one word, and that word is stress. Now, I know so many people react to that in either a negative or positive way when I bring up the fact that you're simply not processing stress efficiently. Oh no, everybody tells me I look so young for my age. Oh no, I don't experience any stress. I don't have any stress in my life. And the other extreme is I'm so overwhelmed I can't even deal with life. I'm suffering from anxiety, from depression. I can't sleep at night. I have diarrhea, I have IBS, all of which are symptoms commonly associated with stress. But in order to really identify stress as a primary cause for the symptoms that you're experiencing, it's important to understand what stress is. So there are a couple of aspects associated with stress. One is the fact that there are two little glands called the adrenal glands that sit on top of your kidneys that are responsible for, among other things, monitoring the environment, both the internal environment and the external environment, for perceived threats to the livelihood of the 50 trillion cells in your body. And when they perceive a threat, they begin to secrete specific groups of hormones, one of the most dangerous being a hormone called glucocorticoid, which has far more damaging effects that we'll discuss in a moment. But the other stress hormones have the net effect of communicating one message to all 50 trillion cells in your body, and that is, listen, we've identified a potential threat to your livelihood. We don't know what it is yet, but until we identify it and are able to resolve it, you need to go into protective mode. And in protective mode, all 50 trillion cells in your body store enough food and oxygen for 3 seconds. For 3 seconds. So every 3 seconds, these cells that are responding to the alarm system, that are in protective mode, are opening up to a toxic environment, grabbing a few crumbs, doing the best they can to maintain their internal integrity, which consists of the same thing as the integrity of the entire human body, which is digestion, respiration, elimination, and reproduction. So over an extended period of time, if this alarm system is sounding 24/7 or sounding on a regular basis with such intensity and so frequently that constant volumes of stress hormones are permeating this biological environment, then you've got a problem that can lead to a number of conditions, a number of symptoms, diagnosed or undiagnosed, or simply identified as a disorder when in fact they're not a disorder. They're not a disease. They are a symptom of an imbalance, a deficiency, or excessive exposure to stress. Now, I'm going to make one simple statement here that sounds kind of complicated, but when you think about it, it becomes relatively simple. You and I and everybody on this planet are the biological end product of our interpretation of our perceptions. All right, let's break that down. We've got the obvious organs of perception, the eyes, the ears, the nose, touch, the five senses, okay? But the skin actually, in addition to being the largest organ of elimination, is the largest organ of perception. And so oftentimes what happens is your body perceives a threat before your brain processes the details of that stress. And as a result of that, the stress hormones are produced. In the presence of the stress hormones, blood is diverted away from digestion, leaving you susceptible to a potential digestive compromise. The gas in the brain called nitric oxide, which is, by the way, the active ingredient in Viagra, often produces the symptoms of ED for the simple reason that the presence of the stress hormones suppresses the production of nitric oxide in the brain, which then suppresses the production of the feel-good hormones, endorphins and dopamine, which leave you susceptible to the symptoms of anxiety and depression, which then interfere with a part of the brain called the hippocampus that's responsible for collating and storing memories, leaving you susceptible to early dementia and Alzheimer's. Also diverts blood away from the portion of the brain over your eyebrows called the prefrontal cortex, which is executive decision making, which is control over your impulses, which is the ability to remember, to recall, to focus, to pay attention. Now you see the symptoms, potential symptoms of things like ADD. You see the other effects of the stress hormones being suppression of other hormones in the body, like estrogen, like progesterone, like testosterone, and like insulin. So you can see where the presence of the stress hormones can leave you susceptible to a wide variety of symptoms diagnosed as diseases, such as interference with digestion, IBS, reflux, interference with production of nitric oxide, anxiety, depression, dementia, interference with the immune system, suppressing the immune system, leaving you susceptible to frequent recurrent infections. You see the presence of the stress hormones, particularly glucocorticoids, has a specific impact on the cardiovascular system. So this glucocorticoid, which is a hormone that's much more powerful, a stress hormone, and is much more damaging than the other stress hormones, also stays in your system longer than any of the other stress hormones, actually scars the inner wall of the blood vessels furthest away from the heart, causing the vessels to become narrow as inflammation is created. That inflammation becomes a magnet for the LDLs, or the low-density lipids, the lousy lipids that when you go to your doctor to have cholesterol checked and they tell you your LDLs are high, one of the reasons that they're high is because There's a high presence of glucocorticoids causing scarring and inflammation in the peripheral vessels, attracting the LDLs into that potential clot, narrowing the vessel, forcing the heart to have to work harder to pump the blood back to the heart. And when it does, it comes back with much more force, slamming against the inner wall of the heart, contributing to a condition called cardiomyopathy, but more commonly, hypertension. So you can see that the net impact of perceiving the environment as something harmful, threatening, internally or externally, interpreting that perception as something that you need to be aware of, you need to protect yourself against, you need to do something to stall or interfere with or manage that perceived or interpreted stress. And then all of these things are translated via electrical impulses and chemical reactions in the body. So those perceptions are eventually translated to the brain, translated to the body via either electrical impulses or chemicals. Both of those eventually degrade into a biological waste product that becomes the contents of your biological environment. So you see how you interpret what you perceive ultimately translates into your human biology and your biochemistry, the environment in which all 50 trillion cells in your body have to live. And unless and until you've identified the source of the stress, you've been able to adopt a strategy for managing this stress and eliminate the source of the stress if possible, you're very susceptible to any of a wide variety of conditions ranging from IBS, dementia, memory problems, anxiety, depression, hypertension, and type 2 diabetes being the most common. So, one last word concerning the concept of stress is that, once again, stress as a feature of the development of individual symptoms actually originates at the point of conception, from which point you develop in the womb, depending upon what kinds of stresses you're subjected to in the womb, whether they're nutritional stresses, whether they're psychological stresses, whether they're relationship stresses between your parents. Then you're born into an environment. And so the initial foundation for stress is partly genetics. All right, you inherit a genetic tendency which requires a specific environment in order for it to express that trait. So just because you've had your genomes done, you've identified what genetic defects you've inherited, does not mean you necessarily will experience any of those unless there's a particular environment that will support the evolution of that trait in the gene, which is a topic for another video called epigenetics that we're going to offer to you at a later time, but it's at this point not inconsequential, but it's not as relevant to your specific relationship with stress. Now, a couple of other features of stress that are critical in understanding the impact that it has on contributing to or causing a lot of these conditions are the fact that in addition to the genetic component, the environment that you function in, including relationships with people and living environments and what foods you're exposed to, how you're taught to interact with other people or other situations, and what significance they have to you, that as you continue to age, the four primary elements of stress and being able to develop a strategy for managing its effects are composed of things like predictability. Do you have predictability in your life as to what's going to happen tomorrow? Or is it a crapshoot, constantly a crapshoot? Do you have a sense of control that whatever does happen, you're going to be able to interact with it in an efficient way so that the impacts are going to be minimal in terms of the results that stress produce inside the human body. Then there's the concept of social support. Do you have people you can talk with, someone that you can share these things with, just to vent or mute the impact of the actual stress hormones on the different systems in the body? And then finally, do you have an outlet for your frustration? So do you exercise? Do you go to the gym? Do you do Tai Chi? Do you do yoga? Do you have some kind of outlet that will allow you to diffuse the impact that stress is having on your body? And the final important concept involving stress is that the adrenal glands, which actually, for the most part, initiate the biological processes associated with the damage that occurs, contributing to all of these conditions that we've talked about, is the fact that the adrenal glands do not differentiate stress. That means that when you think of stress, you automatically, most people think that stress is something bad, when in reality, stress can be something good as well. For instance, the adrenal glands do not care if you walk out the door and get hit by a car or you win the lottery. They do exactly the same thing. So it basically boils down to how you interpret the perception of the threat, incorporate it into the stress response, and how long that stress response lasts, how intense it is, how often it reoccurs, and the periods of recovery in between. Because the more stress you have, the more intense it is, the more frequently you experience it, the shorter the recovery time becomes, and or actually the longer the recovery time becomes, which leaves you susceptible to even more stress, because now you're not recovering from the stresses you were just exposed to. So bottom line here is that I have identified the fact that in your profile, everything, the numbers, the graphs, the interpretation of the fluids, and the expression of the symptoms that you shared with me boil down to one single cause, and that cause is stress.